Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we're off in the spirit of the Literary Cafe. I think this is quite momentous because we've been in neat rows in a lecture hall, I think since the 40s. So this is the first of this kind of ambiance, and I hope that you all enjoy it. We have a wonderful program for you. It is the fourth PEN Syndicated Fiction Award reading, which is directed here in Washington by Caroline Marshall, who is with us and who will say a few words to us about the project. It was originated as a joint venture between the PEN American Center and the National Endowment for the Arts, specifically to return quality short fiction to newspapers, where it had been in the beginning before the heyday of the magazines. The readers this evening, the way it works, the PEN project selects short stories from the contestants, and they're syndicated in the newspapers. And this reading represents a selection by the Library of Congress of 3 stories to be read from among the 10 best, which were chosen this year by novelist James Howard Kunstler. The 2 judges for the overall award had been Richard Bausch and Kay Boyle. I'd like now to introduce Caroline Marshall to tell you some specific and interesting things about the project before we get on and I introduce the 3 writers who will read to you tonight. Caroline?
Thank you, Nancy. It's lovely to look out and see a lot of familiar faces. I too welcome you. It feels like something of a family gathering to have you here, which occurs to me as perfect. What better occasion than a family party to celebrate the stories that make luminous for us our lives as fathers and sons and mothers and daughters and aunts and uncles, all lovers in some form or another, living in the vast brotherhood and sisterhood that this country is. And we're here to celebrate, as Nancy suggested, not only the stories and what they tell us about ourselves and their makers whose skillful use of gifts have preserved lives like our own on the page. We'll be hearing only 3 of them tonight, but in fact we're here to honor 7 other stories and their creators too. They include, these 10 together constitute the project's annual best for 1988, as Nancy told you, which was judged by James Howard Kunstler. The other 7 come from all sorts of places. Mary Alice Ayers from Miami, Nancy Galbraith from here in Washington, Jan Upton Seal from Texas, Richard Hill from Tallahassee, Rafael Zapata from California, Jarvis Thurston from Missouri, and Bill O'Sullivan from Silver Spring, Maryland. This year is quite unusual in that we honor 3 from the Washington area. I view that as encouraging for the country as a whole, a small barometer of local health indicating that not everyone who lives in Washington writes legislation, and that some people here realize they're writing fiction. It is unusual, however. The PEN Syndicated Fiction Project's distinction lies, I think, in the lively democracy of what it does and how it does it, and the rich diversity that results. Each year, a panel of 3 writers, or 2, as was the case in this particular year that these stories came from, chooses what it, or I should say they, consider to be the best short fiction they can find from stories submitted in the project's open annual month-long reading period. The 60 or so stories they select usually represent 25 to 30 states and are drawn from about 2,000 manuscripts whose writers can be found busily printing out and Xeroxing in all 50 states. When the project was begun in 1982, as the joint venture Nancy mentioned between the National Endowment for the Arts Literature Program and PEN American Center, the idea was to provide this annual quota of stories to the broad, democratic audience served by newspapers across the country, to return it to the pages of Sunday magazines where it had been a staple for about 100 years. From the 1850s, when the likes of Stephen Crane's Red Badge of Courage appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle, to the 1950s, when you could still find the sweet purity of work by Steinbeck and Hemingway nestled among recipes for that era's equivalent of oat bran fudge. Almost 600 stories have gone out to editors since then, and about 450 of that number have seen publication in the 28 or so newspapers that participated since the project's creation. That's a lot of voices telling what life is like a little farther down the road, where the sun will set several hours from now, or just down south of here, where the weather makes for a slightly different air to breathe and savor. These 600 stories are tales told between far-flung neighborhoods, in other words, in neighborhoods so dynamic that they have animated imaginations with a new urgency. It's altogether fitting, then, that they should be brought home with the news, as news. To the broad demographic arena of the country's newspapers, the project added another nationwide news medium as well, when the stories began airing on National Public Radio a year ago. Now you can hear the sound of all those voices once a week on The Sound of Writing with host Alan Schuss, whom I would like to introduce right now, if you would be so good as to stand up. The half-hour show features 2 stories and the kind of avuncular and incisive commentary Schuss is known for in reviewing books for All Things Considered. It's carried by stations from Odessa, Texas to Kalamazoo, from San Francisco to Raleigh-Durham. Not in D.C., however, so perhaps you'd like to join this democratic enterprise of ours and lobby WAMU and WETA on our behalf. In any case, as you can see, the project is a far-flung endeavor, wide in its reach to those who write, read, listen, and exchange tales about how their lives are lived in the diverse regions of this country. So we celebrate that and the place of fiction in our lives, as well as those 3 who tonight represent places from across the country and those stories here with us. Thank you so much for coming. Your presence here makes it a celebration.
David Shields. David Shields' first novel was published in 1984 and was entitled Heroes. He's the recipient of many grants and awards, among them a National Endowment for the Arts grant, a New York Foundation for the Arts grant, and an Ingram Merrill Foundation award. He at present is on the faculty of the University of Washington in Seattle, and his novel, Dead Languages, is the one from which his award-winning story, Audrey, is taken. He will read it now. David.
Thank you very much. I'll be reading from the actual book, Dead Languages, which was published this year. The story is sort of adapted from a middle chapter of the book. Audrey Robbins lived alone in Haight-Ashbury at a time, 1969, when it was still very stylish for 8th graders to be living alone in Haight-Ashbury. She was 13, a waif, immensely sophisticated, beautiful beyond belief, had tortured ballet toes, Russian ancestors, and a leather purse. But the telling detail about her was that she liked nothing better than blowing double bubble at the same time that she was inhaling Territon 100s. She was an amazing mixture of pink innocence and smoky extinction. One day she was all light and dance and communist bloc folklore. The next, she was all gloom and doom and standing with me on the Golden Gate Bridge, looking down. It was she, of course, who made the first overture. I've never had the courage to want the world. I've always let it come to me, which is a rather negative approach to existence. But the funny thing is that inevitably it comes. Sooner or later, whether you want it or not, the world comes to you. the world comes at you, and in this case, the world came in the form of someone with a taste for the simultaneity of territons and double bubble. She was head cheerleader of the Bayshore Bobettes, and though she didn't know a jump shot from a running pick, she accepted the post, she told me later, not for the enormous prestige that it heaped upon her person, but because she was obsessed with the color and shape of my legs in the artificial light of the gymnasium in the afternoon. All during basketball season, she'd cheer loudly when my name was announced, bring me sticks of grape licorice at halftime, and jump up and down whenever I was shooting a free throw, which caused my free throw percentage to drop a few points. But I didn't care. She looked so happy, jumping up and down and screaming like that. Week after week of buying gum and cigarettes for her at the Safeway, walking her to the bus station, talking on the telephone until midnight, but nothing was ever said, nothing was ever done. And then, 2 weeks after the 8th grade basketball season was over, in the extraordinary manner in which junior high school romance is conducted, I was handed a letter by Elaine, the assistant head cheerleader of the Bayshore Bobettes, and Audrey's nearest and dearest friend, which said, "Dear Jeremy, March 27th to tomorrow, as I hope you already know, is my birthday. I'm going to be 14. You, of course, are cordially invited. Please, please don't bring any presents. All I want you to bring is your ID bracelet, and if you don't have one, you can afford to go get a nice new one. I hope you don't have to ask what the ID bracelet is for, but if you do, you'll just have to wait until the party to find out. Surely you can guess. You're so smart. Also, I got a big check from Welfare Tuesday, so I'm renting a motel room in the mountains of Marin that I heard about, special heart-shaped swimming pool, where we're all gonna swim and smoke and drink and lie out in the sun celebrating my 14th. Oh, also, Elaine's brother volunteered to drive us all out there. He gets a free dip in the pool as payment. So meet tomorrow at Elaine's house. You know where it is, don't you? At 10 a.m. sharp. All you gotta bring is your ID bracelet, a beach towel, and some snazzy swim trunks. XXOO Audrey. March 27th wasn't her 14th birthday, and she probably hadn't received a big check from welfare, so much as gotten hold of some very high-grade acid and sold it at triple profit. I honestly didn't know why she wanted me to bring the identification bracelet to the party, but I purchased a silver chain bracelet with my initials, JJZ, etched on the underside, a couple cartons of cigarettes, an entire bag of chewing gum, and a pair of red swimming trunks with a blue anchor at the crotch. I arrived bright and early the next morning at Elaine's house. Other than Charles, whom I hadn't seen for a while, I didn't really have any friends, so I couldn't say that Audrey ran with a different crowd than I did. They were certainly a switch, though, from the kind of people who showed up at Mother's coffee clatches. Audrey's friends all seemed to have parents who were dead, diseased, or sadistic. They all seemed to have spent a night in jail or a month with Synanon. They all loved absolutely the dead. There was a story called The Dead, which was at the time was completely incomprehensible to me, but Audrey's friends were not referring to Dubliners. I thought the dead were maybe an occult group that scavenged shallow graves looking for Dybbuk's, since Audrey's friends like to say that at 13 they had lived and loved and now they were ready to die. They'd gone out in the world and found it a waste, whereas I was still trying to build up the nerve to walk alone through North Beach. This discrepancy between my innocence and their decadence made me a little uneasy. But they'd say, "That's what Audrey digs about you, man. You're one of the few uncorrupted cats left." I disliked being called a cat. I saw myself as an infinitely poignant Cocker Spaniel and thought Audrey had selected me because she was obsessed with the color of my legs and the artificial light of the gymnasium in the afternoon. Women always end up saying, "Who are you?" Oh, pardon me. Lately, I've been attempting to project some image of brooding masculine depravity, but women always end up saying, "Who are you trying to kid? You're so innocent. You're such a baby." I suppose Audrey was unusual only in being the first to perceive this fact. None of these hesitations seemed to matter anymore when I was sitting with 12 other people in the back of Elaine's brother's red pickup truck, smelling spilled beer, feeling Audrey's fingers crawl across the floor toward mine. "I hope you brought the bracelet," Audrey said, rubbing her wrist. I patted my shirt and nodded. The motel itself was something of a disappointment. It wasn't on the edge of a cliff overlooking a bay, as its brochure said it was, but on a dirt road with an unobstructed view of an abandoned filling station. The swimming pool was indeed heart-shaped, but was enclosed by a barbed wire fence, the gate to which had to be opened for you. No obscurity to this motel's symbolism. The room Audrey had rented was a dusty, dark affair, with gold bedspreads, sliding doors that wouldn't slide, and Venetian blinds that blinded. A color TV hung from the ceiling like a dead turtle. Quite a few of Audrey's pals wanted to watch late morning cartoons, but as the station announcer insisted on informing us every 30 seconds, we were experiencing difficulty with the audio portion of our program. "Cartoons without sound ain't shit," one of the partygoers observed, and everyone agreed, and so the television set was turned off. Apparently, Audrey had told everyone not to bring presents, but if they really wanted to bring something, a carton of Territons and a six-pack of Double Bubble would be great, because everyone handed her exactly the same thing. Some people had brought bottles of liquor or water pipes for themselves. While they drank and sucked, Audrey blew smoke rings and popped gum bubbles. I sat at her side on the gold bedspread, reading Double Bubble comics. Someone asked the manager of the motel to unlock the gate to the heart-shaped pool. None of them wanted to swim. They just sat along the edge and watched me tread water. They were extremely impressed with how long I could keep bobbing up and down, but it's nothing, really. I've always been able to stay barely afloat forever. After a while, Audrey grew bored sitting in the sun and watching me swim. It was her party, so when she asked me to bring her the bracelet, I jumped out of the pool and ran across the rocky parking lot to the room. When I returned, Audrey was leaning back in the lounge chair, and they were all gathered festively around her. "Here it is," I said, handing it to her. "Well," she said. "Well," I said. "Well," she said. "Well, here," I said, taking the bracelet out of her hands and giving it to her again. "Happy birthday." "Won't you be so kind as to wrap it around my wrist, sweet Jeremy? For as of this moment, you and me are going steady." Most laughed. I thought maybe I'd been brought here as a comic example of pubescent sincerity. or that Audrey was sexually slumming, going through some initiation rites that she'd outgrown when she was 9. But she, if not the rest of them, also seemed deadly serious. Her perfect blue eyes were aching with emotion, with a 13-year-old's thirst for romance. Maybe her mock epic tone was for the amusement of her friends. I knelt down and clasped the chain around her wrist. I didn't know what it meant to be going steady, but I suppose it meant I couldn't see other girls, and I wasn't, so going steady seemed fine. It's beautiful. It's so silvery. I've never owned silver before, never owned JJZ before either, Audrey said, digging her fingers into the carved initials, tugging on my trunks. To celebrate, I'm going to go slipping down the slide, but I don't know how to swim real well, so you catch me when I hit the water, okay? Everyone else stood off at a distance. I dove in, Audrey climbed the ladder. At the top, she stopped and spat the chewing gum out of her mouth. Her legs were spread, her arms were flapping, the straps to her suit were slipping off. She was lying when she said she couldn't swim. She could swim as well or better than I could. She grabbed my hair, wrapped her legs around me, and pulled me under. The deep end was only 6 feet, so we went all the way to the bottom. Through air bubbles and chlorinated water, she kissed me. One always wonders what the first kiss will be like. Suddenly, one is in the midst of it, and it doesn't seem to matter anymore what it would or should or might be like. It is. What it is something entirely different from familial good night and good morning kisses. It's a different thing altogether. The shaking of heads, the rubbing of bodies, the touching of tongues, all this seemed excellent enough. But what I really thought was too wonderful for words was that someone finally liked my mouth. Someone finally liked me and was concentrating all her admiration on my mouth, on my trepidant lips. I came up for air first, and then a second later, Audrey rose, looking for all the world like a mermaid in love. That's the half point of the story. In the way that all people in any deep passion attempt to separate themselves from their society, Audrey said goodbye to her group. And while I didn't bid farewell to my family, I temporarily stopped seeing them as the center of my universe. Audrey sent me ungrammatical love letters in geography class. I wrote poems, very free verse, to her during math. This was 8th grade romance. This was spring passion. This was a flush feeling in the face. Although Audrey was still smoking too much to be in very good athletic shape, she joined the girls' track team, principally, I think, to look at the color of my legs and the natural light of the playground in the afternoon. Soon enough, she turned herself into a tough little sprinter and was running anchor leg for the girls' quarter-mile relay team. I ran the last 100 yards for the boys' team. I ran the last 110 yards for the boys' team. Sometimes the boys would race against the girls. I'd receive the baton a second or two before Audrey did, wait for her, run shoulder to shoulder for 90 yards, and then let out a little kick at the end. It's always seemed to me that if you're really fast and know in your mind how fast you are, from time to time, you'll let the other person win. I've never been that fast at anything. I've always had to prove how superior I was. Once track practice was over, we'd run together around the playground until the last school bus came to take her home. The Bayshore track consisted of nothing more than a painted white circle describing the width of the asphalt field. We'd run around and around the circle, holding hands, me in baggy gray sweats and de rigueur Adidas, and Audrey in absurdly brief briefs, white tennis shoes with pink laces, a San Francisco Giants baseball cap, and sunglasses, shades man to obstruct reality. There is a particular feeling when you are young and sweaty and exhausted that gathers around dusk and macadam and has much to do with a delusion of immortality, with a pervasive sense that the world is dying, but you are indestructible. There's no feeling the physical world produces which is quite so fine, but you're only supposed to get it when you're alone, and even then, only once or twice a year. I was getting the feeling every day, every afternoon, at dusk, on the paved track with Audrey. She didn't say anything about cement or everlasting life, and at the time, I wasn't one to ruin paradise by conversing about it. Running like this with you, sweet Jeremy, it almost makes me want to quit smoking, Audrey said. The pavement was starting to give her shin splints, though. One Saturday morning, she called and said we were going running in Muir Woods. Muir Woods was like the high Sierras, and just its name sent shivers down my spine. It was formally framed, and therefore to me, beautiful. We took a bus across the bay, then hitchhiked through the mountains to the forest. While other people were taking guided tours of the trees, looking at labels in Latin, feeding chocolate bars to chipmunks, counting year rings and exclaiming, Audrey and I ran deeper and deeper, higher and higher into the woods, back where the trail narrowed, vegetation rioted, and big trees were kings. Audrey had brought a backpack of snacks. When we'd run far enough that we could no longer hear the troops below, we stopped and she spread a tablecloth across a patch of pebbles and crabgrass, offering apples, processed cheese, Ritz crackers, and a bottle of Ripple. The entire gesture, the white tablecloth, the prepared lunch, the Saturday morning excursion to a local landmark, was so uncharacteristically and hopefully domestic of her that I passed into a state of such profound happiness that nothing could perturb me. I lay back, looking at timber, tiny bugs, and bluebirds, with cheese and crackers in my mouth and Audrey's head in my lap. That head into which so few thoughts usually entered was in such an idyllic setting, receiving more data than it knew what to do with, and Audrey finally blurted out, "Damn, sometimes, I wish I had parents. Some people seem like they have parents. Other people seem like they don't. You do." "Do what?" I said. I was studying a tree twig and didn't want to talk. "You heard me, have parents. You seem like you have parents." "Yes," I said, "I have parents." "Don't play dumb, Jeremy. I'm talking seriously for once. Sometimes I wish I had grown up, if that's what you want to call it, in some orphanage. Sometimes I get tired of filling out forms and telling people I live with my aunt. Sometimes I wish I had a home to, go home to." I couldn't believe anyone was so innocent that she actually believed that houses were great hearths of banked fires, that families were healthy groups offering comfort and reassurance. I pulled her hair back, kissed her somewhat awkwardly on the nape of the neck, and said, "You can always come home to me." It was a sentimental thing to say. It was meant as nothing more than metaphorical consolation. But maybe she never had anyone tell her that before. Tears came to her eyes, and she fairly attacked me with kisses. She kept saying she loved me and banging my head against the ground. I couldn't tell whether she was hysterical or just very happy. I thought it best in either case to let her do what she wanted and not interfere. She seemed to have been through all the motions before, while I had no idea exactly what my responsibilities were. She licked my ears, unbuttoned my shirt, tugged at my trousers, and I just lay there. I wasn't only afraid of serious sexual arousal, I was incapable of it. I don't know about other boys at 12 and a half, but I was still prepubescent. I was perfectly content to run and clasp hands and kiss on the lips. Audrey, bored, rolled off me, took solace in a Ritz cracker and said, "What's the problem, man?" "Nothing." "Then why did you stop?" "Stop? Don't you want to go all the way?" "No," I said. "No, Audrey, not here, not yet. Maybe soon, but indoors somewhere at night in a week or two. Do you mind?" She waited 3 long weeks for me to grow up, during which time I consulted numerous medical texts and even visited some East Bay medicine man who in a Berkeley Barb classified ad promised organ increase. At the end of 3 weeks was the 8th grade graduation dance. It was tradition for couples who had yet to sacramentalize their unity to do so on mattresses along the side of a hill that overlooked the gymnasium. Audrey wasn't waiting any longer. She came dressed in a black evening gown that she'd borrowed from Elaine, stockings which I'd never seen her wear before, and high heels in which she was slightly taller than I was. With my hair combed across my forehead and my shirt tail flapping, I must have looked like her younger brother, or perhaps her eldest son. Everyone, absolutely everyone, including my basketball coach, invited Audrey to dance. But that night she had eyes only for me and said no to every last one of them. We danced every dance, the fast ones at which she said I looked like a skittering jackrabbit, as well as the slow ones during which I smelled the miscegenation of the sweat on her back with the perfume behind her ears. Whenever the jukebox broke down, I'd buy plastic cups of orangeade, and we'd go and kiss in dark corners. As the dance progressed, there were fewer and fewer people in the gym and almost no couples. Audrey's hints that we ought to take a walk in the dark or get a breath of fresh air became increasingly persistent and obvious. I finally agreed to leave. Walking along the base of that hill was like coming into a war zone. Hearing bodies collide, great screams of pain and expectation, it terrified me. When Audrey took my hand and suggested that we, as it was called, climb the mountain, I panicked and ran. At night, it always seems like you're running faster than you ever have in the daytime, and I felt like I was flying. I ran all the way home. I didn't look back once. I dreamed about some international hand-to-hand combat, and the next morning I got what was coming to me, a letter from Audrey delivered by Elaine with knowing condescension. Dear Jeremy, I'm writing this letter at 3 o'clock in the morning in my dingy little apartment. The electricity, the gas, none of them paid for, and none of them probably ever will. God damn you anyways. I've given you 4 whole months of my life, and what do I get out of it? A lousy crushed Dixie cup of orangeade. Why did you run away from the hill like a skittering jackrabbit? Scared, huh? Afraid? Mama told you not to? Well, I've had enough of little boy Blue and his goodiness all the time. I just can't take it anymore. Enclosed, please find your ID bracelets, slightly scratched, a bit on the back, sorry. 20 minutes ago got mad and took my penknife to it. Maybe we can still be friends, kind of like Elaine and Rob. And I know I'll always value your advice on things, and you're buying me all that gum and cigarettes. It must have cost you a fortune, and the nice, nervous way you talk, and all the running we did together, waiting for my bus to come, and my birthday party at the motel. The first kiss is always best. And most especially, sweet Jeremy, your legs in the gym's fluorescent lights right around 3:45 in the afternoon. But I'm sorry, all the lovey-dovey hand-holding and kissing is fine for a while, but finally I want someone who's willing to climb the mountain with me at least once in a while, don't you know? I'm sorry, Jeremy. You just aren't giving me quite enough action. I need someone a little older or at least a little more experienced. It was just too embarrassing to be alone at midnight at the bottom of the hill at the graduation dance. Maybe, like I say, we can still be friends, and I still do love you, but only like friends. Love, Audrey. P.S. Maybe we can do some running together this summer. Yes, maybe we could still be friends. Maybe we could do some running together this summer. Maybe the Golden Gate Bridge would collapse. It was 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning in May. I sat in a chair in the living room and read the letter 6 or 7 more times to savor all the misspellings, but also to make sure I hadn't misinterpreted its overall message. And then I staggered down the stairs to my bedroom, where I drew the curtains, killed the lights, took out a black and white photograph of Audrey, crawled under the covers, and made my first prolonged attempt at self-abuse. It nearly took forever. 20 minutes later, I was still squirming on the sheets, holding the snapshot in one hand and my barely increased organ in the other, shaking the latter like a pen that wouldn't work. I created blood blisters around the rim, producing fluid that was neither as yellow as urine nor as white as semen, and I finally quit when I reached not so much any kind of orgasm as complete despair. 7 years later, Audrey wrote in her minute script on a postcard she sent me from Port Townsend, Washington. Here's the church that will wake me up Saturday morning, and if I linger at 10. The only time I ever hear the bells is while I'm in bed trying to sleep. I've probably seen half a dozen weddings. Somehow, maybe because everyone looks so small, these scenes, caught from the upstairs window, seem like movies. I'm always imagining ex-husbands, kids from previous marriages. No one's young, no one wears white that I remember. My favorite groom was a fat man in his 50s. The young ones must marry in a bigger church, not this tiny one on a side street. They must look bigger, even from a distance. I don't think I'd be as impressed. I've also become a fan of the ferries across the Sound to Victoria and San Juan Island. It doesn't matter much where, so long as I can sit on the deck reading my latest detective novel. It's very late at night, and I bet the 10 o'clock bells will ring for me tomorrow. In 7 years, she'd moved 700 miles north and learned how to spell o'clock. Nothing ever changes for anybody. The love that lasts the longest is the love that is never returned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. That was a wonderful story. I thought we would pause and let some of these people find a place at the table so they'd be more comfortable before we go on. Okay. I did love that story, reading it, but hearing it was just a wonderful experience. Thank you. Everyone all settled? Oh, there's some over by the wall, some chairs. Everybody pretty much settled? Okay. Kent Nelson will read next. Kent Nelson grew up in Colorado. He is the author of The Tennis Player, a collection of short stories, and 2 novels, Cold Wind River and All Around Me Peaceful. Mr. Nelson's short stories have twice been anthologized in Best American Short Stories. A nationally ranked squash player, he lives in Exeter, New Hampshire. His award-winning story is A Language in the Blood. Please read it, Ken.
My wife wanted to be here tonight. At the last minute, she wasn't able to drive down with me from New Hampshire. But I'd like to dedicate my portion of this reading to her. So this story is for Lori and for our new daughter, Anna Leonie, born yesterday. 7.5 pounds and 4 weeks early. Language in the Blood. Frances Hudson shivered in the darkness. It was nearly midnight, and a cradle rocker half-moon floated in the clear sky, illuminated the pale white shale cliff above her. She had been waiting more than an hour, watching the ranch yard below, and Wilkins's place was finally quiet. The kitchen light and the flickering TV were off, and nothing stirred except a few cattle groaning in the pen behind the house. In the pole light, the ranch yard looked ordinary enough. A defunct harrow and some rolls of chicken wire littered the area near the barn, and Wilkins's old Chevy, purple in the phosphorescence, was parked beside the irrigation ditch, along with a dump truck and a backhoe under repair. A lone cottonwood just within the circle of the arc light cast a ragged shadow on the ground. But for Frances, the yard was not ordinary. Her senses, sharpened in the cold breeze, took measure of every detail. The scent of pinyon and juniper flowed in the air. She was conscious of the surrounding country with its scattered lights and of the few cars on the distant highway. The breeze evaporated the sweat on her forehead. The darkness favored her. Her blue jeans and red plaid jacket hid her as effectively as silence. A coyote sang from the cliff above her, and from a quarter-mile away the Sutter's German shepherd barked shrilly. Frances listened to their give and take, wrapping and unwrapping around her fingers the leather drawstrings of her sack. It was the light she was afraid of, the way it exposed the yard, the way it made the feed buckets on the side of the barn shine like silver dollars. And of course Wilkins. It was not the hour to pay a man like Wilkins a social call. No one knew where she was. By now Darrell would have been by the Outlaw where she worked. He'd have searched for her in Rifle and DeBeck and telephoned her friends. He'd have called her mother, too, saying he was worried. "It's not like her," he'd say. "Why isn't she home?" But for him it was more than worry. He wanted to know everything she did, everywhere she went and whom she talked to. If she were 5 minutes late getting home, he cross-examined her until she was paralyzed with fear and ready to tell him anything. The German shepherd stopped its barking, and the silence made the night more lonely and colder than it was. She inched forward from the rock where she had hidden and started down the hill, clutching tightly to the sack. The sack was awkward but not heavy. It had in it leather gloves, 2 sections of 6-inch plastic pipe, a knife, a small crowbar, and bits of meat in a plastic bag. If things went right, she wouldn't need anything else. She didn't like to think about Wilkins. Whenever she saw him in the bar at work, he muttered things to her under his breath, things she'd never have told Darrell about. And Wilkins tried to touch her. He smelled like beer and ditch mud and grease, and he was filthy from running his backhoe all day. "Come here," he'd say to her, but she stayed away. But he knew she liked birds. Everyone knew that. And one night, not long ago, he'd told her, almost in conspiracy, that he'd trapped 2 eagles in a snare up on the cliff above his house. When she was little, her father had shot eagles. She couldn't recall how many, 8 or 10, but she remembered the rifle shots. She could still see her father kneeling at the corral fence as if he were praying and steadying the rifle on the rail. Boom, the sound was so loud it obliterated all colors, the heat of the day, everything in her mind. She saw the eagle jerk in midair, lose its smooth momentum from sky to cloud. It fell in an arc of loose feathers and useless wings. Once her father had wounded one. It had fluttered down like a huge black butterfly, and she had run ahead to it before her father could shoot again. Its bloody wing lay limply in the dust. The bird glared at her. She put her hand out as if to give it a scent. Approached slowly. Cree, scree. The eagle scrabbled away. She kept between her father and the bird until she was close to it. She stretched out her hand. Then the eagle attacked her suddenly, ripping with its beak the flesh of her forearm nearly to the bone. It danced away, flapping its good wing, trying to fly. Her father shot it 3 more times. She had to lie to the doctor about the wound. "Barbed wire," she said. But that night she pulled apart the doctor's stitches and opened the wound to make certain it wouldn't heal. She descended the hill, tree to tree, and crossed Wilkins' driveway to the blind side of the garage. From close in, the yard looked different, a welter of tread marks and shadowed ruts. Insects whirled through the arc light, and now and then a solitary bat scuttled in and out of the darkness. She didn't know where Wilkins kept the eagles. That was the first problem. He'd have to keep them somewhere the sheriff couldn't see them from the road. Or had Wilkins lied? Maybe there weren't any eagles. He had only told her that story to lure her there. Wilkins' place was eerie at night. What did he hope for with his broken-down equipment and his barren land? His ranch was not that different from the place she'd grown up. In that shale country, people eked out a life on a few acres of sagebrush and irrigated pasture. That's what her father had done, overwatered in spring during the melt, and overgrazed in summer when the land was dry. Then he blamed his troubles on other things, the oil outfitters who bought water, the price of beef, too many people to support. He'd shot eagles, he said, because they killed his calves, but Frances knew that wasn't true. The coyote started its mourning again lower in the rocks, and the sutter's dog answered in a voice not its own, as if there were a language in the blood. Frances waited until the dog had stopped its barking, and all she could hear was the cattle stirring in the pen. Then she shouldered her sack and eased from the protection of the garage. Across the yard by the barn was a hay hoist with a dangling cable, and she made a dash for it. This was her moment. She ran into the light across the open yard, the sack swinging. She tripped once in a rut, pitched forward, and broke her fall with her free hand. Pain shot up her arm, and the sack rattled from her shoulder. She was up again in an instant, lunging toward the hay hoist, where she slid down out of breath into the shadow. No light came on in Wilkins's house. She lay in the cool grass by the hay hoist and listened. She heard nothing except the wind whining through the loose boards of the barn. It had taken all her courage to leave work early and not go home. What could she tell Darrell now? She'd go back to the trailer and she'd say she'd gone out the gravel road to Wilkins's place to set free the eagles. That was the truth, but he wouldn't believe it. She didn't know what he would believe. He'd have already cut off every source of a reasonable lie, all her friends, even her mother. He'd say she was with someone else. She couldn't have been alone. No matter what she said, it wouldn't be right for Darrell. In the beginning, she'd hoped for so much. She'd hoped for a life in a dazzling city. She and Darrell had been married right out of high school when he'd signed a baseball contract to pitch, and they went to Savannah in the Class A Southern League. Darrell hadn't liked the humidity, the bus rides, the apartment they had in a housing complex. She'd been hopeful. It was just the start. But one muggy night after he'd given up 7 runs in 3 innings, they loaded the car and headed home. After that, it was not the same. The gentleness she thought Darrell had promised her disappeared with the dreams. He started drinking more beer, watching more television. He was content, he said, to work his whole life for the highway department, repairing roads and driving a snowplow, as long as she'd be there. As long as she'd be there, she remembered the way he'd made it sound like a threat, as if everything depended on her not to make a false move. The smell of sage was heavier near the hay hoist, a sweetness mixed with the odor of manure. When she caught her breath, she crawled the few feet to the dark plain of the side of the barn, where neither the arc light nor the moon reached. The wind ebbed in the lee. She stood up in the darkness and edged to the far corner away from the house, where the wind took hold again and the moon illuminated a stark slope, barren of trees. Sage and rabbit brush grew scattered across the rocky hill, but what gave her pause was the stench of rot. A deer carcass many days old was propped across the tire of an abandoned tractor. The deer's head had been severed and lay eyeless on the ground. She knew its purpose, though. Wilkins poached deer to feed the eagles. Farther on, beyond the tractor, was the cage. It was built up on stilts and attached to the side of the barn. She approached cautiously, keeping her head tilted into the wind and away from the rotting deer. 1 step, 2. She clutched the sack tightly in one hand and shaded her eyes from the moon with the other. One bird was on a ledge in the back of the cage, the other on a perch. They looked cramped, but no cage, she knew, was big enough for a bird whose domain was hundreds of square miles. She made out silhouettes, broad bodies, tapered wings. They were lovely birds, beautiful birds. When she was 15 or 16, she'd climbed the cliffs to watch the eagles at the nest. The fledglings were lumps of cotton with razor beaks, eager for meat. But it was the adults she admired. One of them was always nearby, sailing along the face of the cliff, its golden head and epaulets gleaming in the vivid air. Where did it hunt its prey? What must it see? She wished she could have leaped on its back and soared with it to those places only it knew. The cage was not as she expected, not a wooden frame with chicken wire, though when she considered it, she understood such a cage would never hold an eagle. Rather, it was a frame made of iron pipes with bars of thick cable stretched tightly and clamped in a grid. There was no door. It had never occurred to her the cage might have no opening. To get the birds out, she'd have had to unclamp the cables, and she'd brought no tool for that. She grasped the pipe frame in her hands and peered into the cage. One of the eagles woke and flapped its wings, waking the other. Scree. All she'd wanted was to let them go. But if Wilkins had clipped their wings, she would have stolen them. She'd brought the gloves to protect her hands and the sections of pipe to put them in to keep their wings tight so they couldn't hurt themselves. But now she could do nothing. Beautiful birds, she thought. Lovely birds. She felt her tears well up without sound, and she stepped back from the cage and pulled up the sleeve of her jacket. Her white skin shone in the moonlight. "You did this to me," she whispered. She tilted her arm so the jagged scar was visible. "Look at me." The eagles did not look at her. They defied her as she knew they would, but she'd not come just for them. She'd wanted something beyond opening the door to their cage, even beyond stealing them. She knew she would have no excuse to give Darrell, knew what he would accuse her of. She knew the risk of being alone at Wilkins's place. She opened her sack, found the plastic bag with the bits of meat in it, and took out several pieces. "Come on now," she said. "Here." She pressed her face against the bars and pushed her hand through. "Come on." The eagle nearer tilted its head away. Its fierce eye caught the moonlight. The bird hesitated, and she called to it softly, "Cree, scree." She held the scrap of meat closer. The bird stretched, jostled nearer on its perch. "Here, baby," she said. But this offering deceived. When the bird lowered its head to take the bit of meat, she pinned the bird with all her strength against the thick cables. She held it for a moment more tightly than in love, felt in her cold hands the warmth of its body beneath the feathers. She squeezed its neck hard, stared into its glittery God's eye until its body trembled. When the trembling stopped, she let the dead bird fall and turned to the other. "Scree," she called to it, "scree." The bird stayed on the ledge, beak agape, silent. She took the crowbar from her sack and poked it through the bars. She nudged the eagle to a corner, drew back the weapon, flailed hard at the bird's head. She struck it again, stunned it, bloodied its feathers. Then she went around the outside of the cage and twisted the bird's neck until the bone snapped. She stood back and gripped the iron pipes with both hands. "Turn around," Wilkins said, real slow. She was not surprised by the voice. She pushed away gently from the cage and edged around to face him. She couldn't see his face clearly. He had on a cowboy hat with the brim down, but she could see the rifle. "Dead?" he asked. She nodded. He came forward, holding the rifle sideways in front of him, and looked into the cage. Then he turned around. For a moment she saw his thin, ghost-like face and the faint smile. A terrible exhaustion came over her, a feeling which erased kindness and patience and bitterness. She was not afraid of Wilkins. He could do nothing to her, and she held her arms and bloody hands straight out into the dark air like wings.
Thank you, Kent. Linda Barrett Osborne reviews books for several newspapers, including the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Detroit News. Her award-winning story, A Natural Resemblance, was published in the Chapel Hill, North Carolina Village Advocate and in the St. Petersburg Times as part of the Penn Syndicated Fiction Project. Ms. Osborne is the author of a children's book, Song of the Harp, and has published many feature articles in the Washington Post. She has taught contemporary fiction for the Smithsonian Resident Associates Program, and she has directed poetry and fiction writing workshops with children and high school students. So now, Linda, if you please would read us A Natural Resemblance. Okay.
I want to thank you all for being here, and to thank Caroline Marshall and the Penn Syndicated Fiction Project and Nancy Galbraith and Jennifer Rutland of the Poetry Office. for making this event possible and for including me. And I also really enjoyed the two stories that followed, that preceded me. I'm going to read a story called A Natural Resemblance, and I'm going to answer the questions that the people who read it always ask me afterwards now. I am from an Italian-American background on both sides of my family. My grandmothers both worked into their late 70s. They did know each other before my parents were married, but they weren't particularly friends, and I never, ever would have thought of living with one or both of them. Okay. A natural resemblance. My grandmother Anna always said that the ideal woman could cook lasagna for 25 and still hold down a full-time job. She said it frequently to build my character the year we became housemates in her slim brownstone on Manhattan's Upper West Side. Angelina, my father's mother, lived there too. Friends since childhood, my grandmothers joined forces in widowhood, sharing the cooking and cleaning. At 74, Anna ran her own dress shop, and Angelina, a year younger, sold jewelry and cosmetics at a Woolworth's, where you could still buy goldfish and parakeets, and eat grilled cheese and bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches at the L-shaped counter at the back. I had just graduated from Princeton and was looking for an apartment, although my parents couldn't believe that I didn't want to live in my old room on Long Island. For years we kept it nice, my mother accused her unrepentant prodigal daughter. You belong with us, and anyway, you don't have enough money for a decent place of your own. But I longed to be in New York, and I spent 3 weeks walking through every tiny, dark place that grew there. Mushroom caves with closets pretending to be bedrooms, two-dimensional kitchens that were really half a wall, paint peeled in long strips like potato skins, and hallways smelled of cat, olive oil, and worse. One apartment had a mural of a mermaid amidst conch shells and nets. Art, said the landlady placidly. Of course, you pay more for that. Exhausted, I stopped by Anna and Angelina's for tea. I had always loved their block, the way it grew immediately quieter when we turned off Broadway, the elegant line of narrow houses with their bay windows to catch the light. My grandmother's house had leaves and scrollwork carved into stone and a finely cut cornice. Inside, the staircases and moldings were oak, and the plaster swirled with vines and flowers. Each room had a fireplace and built-in bookshelves, and the bedrooms all had dressing rooms with hand-painted porcelain sinks and marble counters. Anna had inherited the house from her Uncle Guido, who made his fortune selling sausage and wanted a house full of marble to remind him of Italy. You wouldn't believe the prices of the rooms I've seen today, I said to them, sitting at the kitchen table, tracing the swirly patterns on the formica I had traced as a child. And there's nothing like this place. I love this house. Good, said Anna, cutting a giant wedge of cheesecake. You should live here with us. You're kidding, I said, knocking tea onto the table. It's a good idea, baby, said Angelina. You could have the whole top floor, your own bedroom. It's pretty up there, lots of sun. Thanks, but I want my own place. My own place, I said again loudly. No thanks, I gestured to Anna. I don't want any more to eat. Would we bother you? Anna handed me the cheesecake. You'd be on the top floor. We never go up there anymore. At our age, it's hard to climb the stairs. At their age, they were both working, agile as lizards, the envy of every senior citizen in New York. Anna had even attacked a mugger 3 years before, belting him from behind with a shopping bag full of Italian pastry. He'd fled, and the astonished victim, an English professor at Columbia, could only light his pipe and murmur over and over, "Well done." If you lived with us, you could save money, Anna purred. You could have your own nice apartment in a year. A year, my God! I tried to imagine it. TV every evening, the latest cure for cancer to talk about. They would make me eat 700 pieces of cheesecake, and I'd gain 300 pounds. It's out of the question, I said. Thanks anyway. I moved in the following week. You're going to live with them? My mother screamed, as if I'd thrown in my lot with drug dealers. It's your mother. I thought you'd be pleased. The food isn't good enough here? We don't leave you alone? I told you I just want to be in the city. The city. I don't understand any of you. Here it's quiet and safe. We worked so hard to get out of the city. They had. It was a ballad of my childhood, how my father, an engineer, saved a little money, bought property just after the war, and managed to erect a house on it within 8 years. He took well to suburban living, puttering in the garden, seeding and weeding his infant lawn, setting out his hammock to watch the first stars appear at night. My mother, too, thrived in her paradise of burgeoning shopping centers and subdivisions. She bought white wrought iron lawn furniture topped by a giant flowered umbrella where she could linger over coffee on summer mornings with her friends. When she went back to work as a secretary, it delighted her to drive to the office in her own car and never have to take a dirty bus or subway again. You could commute, my mother tried one more time. You could look for a job on Long Island. I don't want to waste 2 hours a day packed like a sardine, and I'd rather work in New York. Besides, I'm too old to live with my parents. So you're going to live with your grandparents, she said, and then, why should I be surprised? You're just like them. You know everything, and you're stubborn. I took over the top floor of the brownstone, breaking my mother's heart. I hung my jeans in the walk-in closet, my Matisse prints above the fireplace. I filled the cases with my books. Angelina had been right. My room was saturated with light. What she didn't tell me was that it only came in the morning, when the sun would insist its way in, spilling over the bed like melted butter. It hit the pillow first, moving towards the foot like a curious, desultory lover. There was no sleeping late in that room. Shades didn't help. The rays seemed to bend around their edges, setting the walls and floor on fire. I wondered how long Anna had planned to get me into that room. Anna, the early riser, up before 6 a.m., running enough water to quench Mount Vesuvius into her bath. Anna, who never took showers because nothing is healthy if you stand up to do it. That's a scientific fact, she said. Thank you. There was Anna, secretly hoping to get me into that prism of a room. She sleeps too late, she would tell Angelina. It's not good for her health. And Angelina would nod in agreement because God knows, in this world, nothing is good for your health. So I would wake up with the sun, letting my bare feet hit the warmed floorboards. For a while, I planned to read through those extra minutes, moving peacefully into the day. But Anna, who had miraculously learned to climb the stairs, could hear my shallow breathing behind the door, sniffed out the turning pages. She would knock on some pretext. Your pantyhose, Laura, there's still time to rinse them out if you hang them by the radiator. I'd close my book and pad out to the bathroom, pushing my way through jungle vines of underwear. I had never seen underwear so spacious as Anna and Angelina's. The word panty was too small to contain those billowing, silky shorts. Next to them, my bikinis looked like doll clothes. There were always notes in the bathroom, too, fastened to the light switch with Scotch tape. Towels in hamper, or bring Kay $10, or my favorite, Angelina, don't forget lunch. The frayed edges of old tapes were everywhere, and I would stand there in a morning reverie, picking them off with my nails. Annotate notes downstairs, too, over doorknobs, on lampshades, scrawled in her turn-of-the-century script. Buy margarine, a scrap in the living room might read. Do laundry on the back door. I could never figure out how the notes got where they did. It was as if Anna's brain couldn't rest until she got her thoughts on paper, and after that, it didn't matter where they lay. Old notes stayed up, sometimes 2 or 3 months, fossils to chart the history of our daily survival. Angelina sometimes did it, too. The kitchen was a symphony of themes and responses on torn napkins. Cooked dinner, I found myself writing 3 weeks after I'd moved in. I taped it to a burner, and Anna said, "What's this, baby?" as she put water on for coffee. "I want to make something special for you tonight to celebrate my arrival. Shall I pick up some fresh pasta from Fontana's?" "I'm planning this myself," I said. "Just be at the dining room table at 6:30. You don't need to do a thing." "The dining room," said Angelina, "but you have to carry everything up from the kitchen. We always eat down here." "The dining room," I said again, 6:30. Trust me on this. When I carried up the meal on a huge chrome tray, they were both sitting, apparently obedient, at the table. "Cloth napkins," Anna said to Angelina, fingering the linen. "It's extra to wash, and you have to iron them." "I'll wash them. I'll iron them," I said, setting down a platter and a basket of 8-grain bread. I poured white wine into glasses and sat at my place. "There," I said, "salmon salad." They both looked at me. "Do you want me to serve?" When no one answered, I began putting a portion on each plate. Anna rummaged around with her fork. We're having lettuce for supper? This must be the antipasto, Angelina said suddenly. No, it's the whole meal. You each get a hard-boiled egg and all that salmon. Go ahead, take some bread. They each took a piece. We usually eat, Anna started. I held up a hand. I know you buy rye sometimes. Without the seeds, said Angelina. This has rye flour in it and lots of other things. Just try it. Angelina took a bite. It's hard to chew. It has texture. I started to rise. If you want, I'll go down and get your bread. Sit, Anna said. This is your special meal for us. We'll eat it. She picked at the greens on her plate, knocking over a chunk of salmon. She held up a dark leaf on the edge of her fork. What's this? It's spinach. You didn't cook it? It's healthy that way, I said, reaching for my glass of wine. It keeps all the vitamins when you eat it raw. Angelina focused on her plate, carefully cutting a tomato wedge. Anna gulped her wine and poured more from the bottle. We ate in surprising silence. I could hear Angelina chewing patiently on the lettuce and the bread. I was the only one to take seconds. I'll get dessert, I said, and start the coffee. I stacked the dishes onto the tray. We'll do that, baby, said Anna. Whoever doesn't cook does the dishes, Angelina said. That's okay. Tonight I'll do everything. I started towards the stairs. You can't carry that by yourself. It's too heavy. Anna rose. No, it's not, I said, knocking into the stairwell. I puffed downstairs and dropped the tray with a thud onto the counter. While I waited for the coffee, I drank another glass of wine. Then I shoved everything on the tray again and clumped back upstairs. They stopped talking when I entered, smiling, as if I'd come on stage at a dancing school recital. It's strawberry shortcake, I said. Beautiful, baby, Anna said. What bakery did you get it from? Asked Angelina. I made it myself. Of course she did, Angelina, said Anna. Does that look like a cake from a bakery? It looks that good at Romano's. Romano's, sure, but that's in Brooklyn. Would she go to Brooklyn for a cake? If they make the best cakes. Would anybody like some, I said, serving. Delicious, said Anna. As good as Romano's, said Angelina. Better. Anna lopped off a large piece with her fork. Just think, Angelina, our granddaughter can make a cake like this. I smiled. Grown-up Laura, who could cut her own meat now and didn't need to sit on 2 telephone books to reach the table. It's only fruit and cream, I said. But the cake part is so light. Not everybody can cook so good these days, baby. It will help you find a husband. That's ridiculous, I said. It's true. I don't mean, first of all, why would I go out and look for a husband? And second of all, why should the fact that I cook matter? Should he pick you because you can't cook? Angelina sounded surprised. He shouldn't pick me at all. That's not how it works. They looked at each other. Tell us, said Anna, how does it work? You fall in love. Anyway, you have things in common. You get along well. It doesn't matter who cooks and cleans. You both should. If a man likes to cook, they always leave a mess in the kitchen, said Angelina. Your grandfather cooked, said Anna, until Angelina told him to stop. He wanted to make soufflés, 6 pans with eggs stuck on them. He wanted to put thyme in the spaghetti sauce. Who wanted to eat it? I think that's great. You didn't have to clean up after him, said Angelina. Whoever doesn't cook does the dishes, I said. Angelina started to rise. No, sit, I'll do them, I said. The telephone rang. I ran to answer. You didn't call, said my mother. But I just talked to you last week, I said, beginning to feel weary. It must take up a lot of time, waiting for a crowded subway, shopping in those tiny grocery stores. Your father and I drove to the beach today. We were there in 15 minutes. Great, I said. I cooked dinner for us tonight. They let you? When I was growing up, Anna would cook for my mother. She would arrive on Sundays with half the meal packed into shopping bags, kicking at the door with her foot to announce she was there. She dusted, too, and even did the laundry. Ma, it's my home, my mother would sigh, but Anna would say, let me. You work. You need help. Forgetting that she worked, too, and didn't. It made my mother anxious. She and my father had been waiting years to take over. They wanted to be the family adults, the wise ones, but as long as my grandmothers remained healthy and strong and independent, they were still somehow children. All their lives they'd been told what to do without anyone to tell. They wanted to show that faint condescension of the middle-aged towards the elderly. Instead, every solicitation was met by argument and worse, action which ignored them. "I know best," said Anna. "I'm your mother. What could my mother do?" "So what's it like living there?" asked my mother, curiosity and anxiety fighting in her voice. "Great, we watched a special on cancer, The Champion Killer, last night." "We saw that too. Who would have thought that sun is bad for you? But what's it like?" she pressed. "Who does the housework?" "We share," I said. "Look, Mom, I'm a big girl now. I'm independent too. They know I can take care of myself." For a minute I almost believed it. "Sure," said my mother. "You wait. Mom, let me talk to your grandmothers." "Hold on, I'll get them," I said. But when I looked in the dining room, nobody was sitting in there. I found them in the kitchen doing the dishes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Why don't we applaud for all three of these wonderful writers? Thank you all for coming. Now let us go out and mingle with each other and with them and have